Hello and welcome to an action-packed, star-studded episode of the Wisden Cricket Weekly Podcast. The men's and women's Ashes trash talk ramped up to another level this week with less than a month to go until the start of the Test summer. The two county championship tables are beginning to take shape. There are reports concerning the increasingly precarious future of the 100. There's the IPL, Pakistan, New Zealand, the Rachael Heyhoe Flint Trophy, and a very special new issue of Wisden Cricket Monthly, guest edited by none other than close friend of the magazine, former England bowler and superstar broadcaster Isa Guha. I'm Yas Rana, and with me to get through all of that is Joe Harman, Phil Walker and Ben Gardner. Mark Butcher will be joining us from Pakistan later in the show, and there's also a chat between Joe and Isha lined up as well. Let's start with the Ashes build-up chat, because why not? That's what the people want. Joe, what's your moment of the week?
Well, it has to be Stuart Broad's pronouncement that the last Ashes series in Australia is void, that it was a sort of COVID-y fever dream that should be entirely disregarded, or maybe if you try hard enough to forget it, it just didn't even happen at all. Broad's having an absolute stormer at the moment. If his bowling's anywhere near as good as his pre-Ashes chat, he's in for one hell of an Ashes series. So obviously last week I heard you chatting about the unheralded new delivery, the outswinger that he was forecasting before the series. And then last week, a few days later, he sat down for an interview with Paul Newman in the Daily Mail, brilliantly at a promo event for Marmite as well, which sums it up quite nicely, and chucked a few more logs on the fire before we get going. The quote, these were obviously widely distributed, so you've probably already heard them, but if you haven't, the quote from Broad was, "Nothing was harsher than the last Ashes series, but in my mind, I don't class that as a real Ashes. The definition of Ashes cricket is elite sport with lots of passion and players at the top of their game," which you could argue would mean there hasn't been an Ashes series in Australia for about a dozen years now. But anyway, he continued, "Nothing about that series was high-level performance because of the COVID restrictions, the training facilities, the travel, not being able to socialise. I've written it off as a void series." Broad's always used the media quite cannily, and he's used it with a bit of an edge in the past. We had the infamous interview with Sky after he got dropped for, was it the Aegeus Bowl in 2020? And then obviously when he didn't get picked for the Caribbean tour, he used his newspaper column. But now you get the sense that he's kind of in a place where he feels comfortable with his role in the England team. He's happy, and he's just having a whale of a time winding up whoever he can. He knows the game inside out, on and off the field, and he's very good at playing it. It feels almost like a kind of extension of his remit as the Nighthawk to come out and play some early shots, and I
thought that was banned.
And he's doing. I wasn't on that show.
Okay, fine.
And he's doing it before the month before the whole thing even starts. So I'm sure there'll be more before it gets going. But Broad's had a good couple of weeks, I think, in the kind of pre-Ashes hype.
Yeah,
he's even folding in Notts Forest's relegation scrap into a little bit of self-promo as well.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I was just going to mention that a couple of weeks ago, a tweet went out to Forest fans asking, would you start Brendan Johnson tomorrow? And Broad, obviously a big Nottingham Forest fan, replied, if he's fit, 1,000,000,000% yes. Big players for big occasions. So even when Broad's tweeting about Nottingham Forest, he's putting forward his own case for selection in the Edgbaston Test. But got us thinking, can we think of other games or series that should retrospectively be declared void? We got one message from a listener that I thought was quite sad, actually. He said that my best ever performance was literally declared void. I scored an unbeaten 118, chasing 176. It was the first time I ever passed 50 and my only ever century. The team forfeited the last two games of the season and were therefore removed from the league. And those games were taken away from the record books. Never got near 100 again.
So, and he hasn't got no more 100 since?
Never got 100 again.
And yet he has had it declared on the Wisden podcast.
That is true. That was from Nick, by the way.
Let's use his name.
But can we come up with any other examples of series or games that should have been declared void?
Well, on Broad's justification there, pretty much any series that happened during COVID shouldn't have counted because it was not great situation. So Pakistan and West Indies coming over here, those don't count.
Crawley's 267 then, that's null and void. So we really are in trouble.
Well, Ben's been saying it's null and void for years now. So
that's not fair. Let's not do that.
Can we do some history? Something that shouldn't have been void, that was voided?
Go for it.
The 1970 Rest of the World series that was played in England after a tour by South Africa was cancelled at the very early stages of their exclusion due to apartheid. It was very competitive cricket played. At the time, it was considered full-level Test cricket. And actually, it was only in 1980, I think about 10 years later, that it was finally fully expunged from the Test records. And that was actually with the Wisden Almanac at the time protesting. And I think the saddest thing about that is that Alan Jones, who now holds the record for the most first-class runs without a Test cap, that was when his only England appearance came, was in that series. And he was awarded an honorary England cap, I think, a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
But hasn't got an official one, and I think that should be probably reinstated.
That's good.
Nice.
Good stuff.
Gardner.
Phil, you got one?
Well, the 79-80 Ashes tour, when all of Australia's best players, with the exception of one or two, had obviously gone over to the Packer Revolution, the Packer Circus, whatever you want to call it, and England went out there under Brearley and won 5-1. You imagine a 5-1 in Australia. So, and that was against the Stiffs. So there's always a massive asterisk, I think, against that series. And the other one that I thought of this morning, which shouldn't be voided, but in my head is voided, is England 2, South Africa 1, 98 series in England. When it's the Atherton-Donald series, right? Now, in the age of DRS, England would have got beat probably 4-0 in this series, but they somehow managed to burgle a 2-1. The third Test match was the game when Fraser and Croft batted
out
for
Old Trafford, was it?
Old Trafford. They batted for at least 2 hours, maybe 3. I think Croft batted for 3, Fraser about 2, something like that, to save the game 9 wickets down. Now, that's a legit draw, sure, although South Africa lost 5 wickets in the match and England lost 19. But that's fair. That happens in cricket, fine. England got absolutely whacked in the second Test. The fourth Test was the Atherton Test, obviously gloved it and Nasser dropped and all the rest of it. The fifth Test was a joke, and England won it by 20-something runs, 23 runs they lost it by. And I remember watching it at the time, and it was just hilarious. And there was an umpire, I think he was called Javed Akhtar, Pakistani. And he was just having one of those days out as an umps, right? Everything was out. Gough took 6 for some laughable decisions, and England somehow nicked that one by 20 runs. But again, in the age of DRS, that's a 4-0. I also remember at the end of that series, Alex Stewart, who was skipper at the time, walking round to every player in the dressing room, and the cameras are in the dressing room. You think it'd be this big celebration. England have been rubbish for a long time. They win a big series against a good side. And Stewart went round to every single one of them and just shook their hands. And they were all just sitting bolt upright like this, terrified of the cameras. And Flintoff, who I think had bagged the pair in that game, had a kind of a page 3 girl on his locker behind. And as the camera panned round, he grabs it and hides it behind his back as Sir Alec is walking around, and like as a minor royal, just sort of deigning to shake every player's hand. Well done, sir. Well done, sir. Well done.
Footage of this must exist somewhere.
Probably, yeah.
That's one for Robert Linder.
Are we going to be voiding things for incorrect umpiring decisions then? Because then we get into the 2005 Ashes and the hand off the bat, and we also get into pretty much every home Pakistan series before about 1990 was me and Dad never giving out LBW at home, I think is the...
Yeah, he was good for mid-wicket though. You've got to be careful. You've got your legacy to think about here, Gardner.
Yeah.
Excellent. I remember a couple of years ago, Atherton was... I think there was a conversation on Sky, or it might have been somewhere else, but Atherton was basically asked a question about how bad were England in the 90s. And he kind of, first thing he said straight away was, well, we beat South Africa in 98, so we can't have been that bad.
They did. Look in the book.
They did.
That's cricket. Look in the book.
Last week's show was recorded as Johnny Bairstow was making his comeback for Yorkshire Twos. He made scores of 97 and 57 in the end. His second innings dismissal was hilarious. He missed a genuinely grim full toss from leg spinner Calvin Harrison. And you can't really work out exactly why Bairstow was frustrated at the end, because I think he was annoyed at himself for missing it, but I think he also thought it was one of those that was probably going down leg as well.
He plays this week though, right? So he comes in, I think, this week. I think that's all confirmed. He plays against Glamorgan this week. First team debut.
Yeah.
And is keeping wicket seemed to be the discussion beforehand, which he said is a non-story because that's what he does when he plays for Yorkshire.
Yeah.
But inevitably it will become a story, and there'll be quite a lot of eyes on how he keeps wicket as well, I imagine.
Yeah. He wasn't keeping wicket in the Twos game, so I don't know. I know that's what the story was before the start of the summer. I don't know if that's changed at all. Over in the IPL, Jofra Archer returned to action for Mumbai Indians this week after the ECB confirmed that he flew to Belgium to see an elbow specialist during the IPL. He was back bowling quickly against Rajasthan Royals on Sunday, but he's only bowled 12 overs across the tournament so far, and he's yet to play in consecutive matches at the time of recording. So I guess a test match, especially considering what happened with Anderson at Edgbaston 4 years ago, feels some way off at the moment. We get asked multiple times a week about how we'd all fit Johnny Bairstow back in the side when he's fit. And I thought we'd exhausted the conversation. But that was until we got this question sent in by Luke from Worcestershire, who asks, do you think that one option for having Bairstow in the test team is to have him replace Jack Leach with Bairstow batting 6, Stokes at 7, and then Folkes at 8 with 3 seamers following? I'm not saying this is foolproof, but it is a way of keeping all the main players in positions that suit them better. Ben.
Oh.
No, I do not think that's a good option to go down. I think you need a proper spinner, especially when if your fourth bowler is Ben Stokes, who also can't really bowl at the moment, and then what you've got then a 40-year-old, a 36-year-old, and someone who you're hoping is going to be an out-and-out speedster who can, be used in short, sharp bursts rather than, doing the donkey work, then actually who is going to bowl your overs at that point. So I think England like Jack Leach, and they are going to need a spin bowler. Also, I would argue that's not Ben Folkes' best position in particular because...
we covered that last week. Yeah. It's okay.
But yeah, that's...
You'd say as well, I mean, Ben Stokes, the Jack Leach project has been one that he's spent a lot of time and energy on. He's not going to abandon it now just as we hit the Ashes.
I mean, that is going to be one of the most fascinating things about the first test match, because we've not really talked about Leach because his position in the side is, as Ben says, is very stable. But we know exactly how Australia are going to come at him. Even in the county championship last week, Luke Wells hit him for 3 reverse sweeps in a row. I think he was going at 5s. And I think his coach afterwards talked about Leach's role in the side being one to be a wicket taker rather than a container. It's like, that's not really what it is for England. So we know exactly how Australia are going to play it, and how that goes, I think, will go some way to determining how the series goes. I don't think that's an overstatement.
No, I think more rather than the spinner getting dropped to make room for Bairstow, I think a scenario that I could see playing out more likely is, Leach has a difficult opening couple of tests, doesn't take the wickets and leaks a few runs, and then people start saying, well, Rian Ahmed is an attacking spinner who can get you wickets, he'll leak runs, but also he's scoring runs in county cricket. That feels like a more likely scenario. Not that I want to start writing Jack Leach off before we even started the Ashes.
He's in credit for what happened at Leeds last year when he took 10 for on a pitch where finger spinners don't tend to get that much purchase generally. And obviously Stokes has played him everywhere he's gone. So yeah, I mean, in pragmatic times, he plays. If Joe Root happened to be captain, he probably wouldn't. I mean, he didn't play him hardly at all at home. But he fits into Stokes's gig. But it's nonetheless an interesting question, right? And if we do accept that nothing quite works, and leaving Bairstow out feels awkward, but if he has to come in, as McCullum famously said, he walks straight back in, then you do have to try and shake it all around to find something that doesn't quite fit or doesn't quite settle. And yet will have to happen anyway. I'm not predicting this will happen.
The other thing with that as well,
good question.
You'd be requiring more overs out of Stokes, wouldn't you? And that feels like a stretch. Stokes' bowling is a bit of an unknowable at this stage, but however he's doing, you don't want him bowling too many overs because we know what's around the corner if he does.
This week it was reported in various newspapers that the ECB are considering the future of the men's 100 as well as a reconfiguration of what the domestic summer might look like, which I'm pretty sure they do every year. But according to the Telegraph, early discussions have taken place about potentially rebranding the 100 as an 18-team T20 competition called the English Premier League with promotion and relegation. Each county would host a team, but these teams wouldn't be counties. The women's competition would probably only start with a top tier that is played alongside the men's competition. Phil, what were your initial reaction when you saw those headlines and the details within them?
My initial reaction was formulated about 10 minutes ago because I didn't read it at the time and I took a few days off after we went to press last week. So I am playing catch up on this. I read Nick Holt's opinion piece, which went alongside the news story in the Telegraph. And I mean, he's consistently bang on with stuff around the structures of English cricket. I think he was absolutely. I couldn't disagree with much of it. Right, there is this devastating polarization around the tournament, as we know, and there'll be many people who will be jumping for joy if the thing is scrapped. I'm not one of them. I don't think we can be dismissive of the fundamental role that this tournament plays in the financing of the game and in the ongoing functionality of the game. Whether that tournament changes its complexion in due course is an additional question. But the notion of just going back to what we used to have, putting a bit more money into the Blast, giving that a little bit more of a push, I don't think that's realistic, and I think that would be a bad look. And as Holt says, and I agree with him, I think we would be consigning ourselves to having a good in parts, but overall not particularly powerful and at times mediocre tournament. And I know that's a very gravid word, right, in all of this, famously used by Colin Graves about the T20 tournament, but that is the reality. And if you're thinking about the sellability of English cricket around the world, and that is absolutely critical, and it just is, because the Indian market calls so much of the shots, and if you can get Indian ad revenue into English cricket, then that bolsters the whole game financially. And you have to bear in mind the counties are desperate for money. The counties. There's been many cases in recent years where the counties have gone to their own local councils and said, look, we need a bailout because we are really, really struggling. Some of the smaller counties said on record, without that 1.3 mil payment, bribe, whatever you want to call it, to get the 100 off the ground in the first place, they would have been really struggling themselves. So make no mistake, all the money flows from TV rights and ad revenue. And worldwide ad revenue is obviously ramped up if those TV rights can be sold around the world. So that's what English cricket faces. And if you want to have a tournament where the players can get paid sufficiently well to ward off all the other threats of Saudi Arabian tournaments and American tournaments and IPL 12-month contracts, if that's what you're faced with, then you have to find a way to generate as much revenue into a tournament that can be sold around the world. That was the thinking behind the 100. I understand the argument that it was botched. I understand the argument that creating a fourth format was a mad decision. I totally understand that argument. I respect that argument. Personally, I can see the good and the bad in that thinking. I can understand that they wanted to make a departure from the existing T20 tournament to create some daylight between the 18 T20 Blast and this new thing. I can totally understand that. I can also understand why people say you make a mockery of it.
But when you see, Lawrence Booth kind of broke the story in the Daily Mail that they were having these sit-down talks, informal talks about going back to T20 because they're concerned that the rest of the world aren't playing the 100. That will be hugely frustrating for a lot of people to hear, given that everyone was screaming it from the rooftops when this thing was talked about in the first place.
You're right.
And the argument, I suppose, from ECB's point of view would be that, you know, the game has changed, the game has developed, all these other leagues have come along. None of that is a surprise. You know, maybe it's accelerated at a speed that we weren't anticipating, but not really, not hugely.
Yeah.
So that would be a hugely embarrassing climb down. And the problem is, and I mean, my view was always actually that a kind of a souped up T20 Blast did have some merit and was at least worth a go before diving into the 100 and ripping the whole thing up. The problem is now, I think the genie's out of the bottle. I don't think you can really go back. When you've said to broadcasters, we've got this shorter version, it's really suitable for TV, and they've lapped it up, to then say, well, no, this isn't quite working, we're going to go back to how we had it before, 18 counties, longer games. I just don't know if that's feasible at this point.
I think there's a really interesting point that Nick made in his piece, was that you either need to bin the 100 or you need to back it. And he's saying the current position of the 100 is just quite awkward and it's not really achieving its goals. I think that, as you say, the landscape's changed so quick in the last few years. And as you said, the revenue that comes into English cricket, so much that comes from TV broadcast deals that are based on bilateral cricket. And we've been talking about quite a lot. We don't know what the future of bilateral cricket looks like. So I kind of think this proposal is going in the opposite direction of what everyone else is doing. Yeah. Everyone else is trying to create their own inbuilt, safe revenue generator that's appealing across the world. This isn't that. And it kind of, I know there are two different purposes here. There's three even. There's like growing the game, generating revenue, and keeping the county system happy, and is which one do you prioritise?
Yeah.
And I think quite soon you could just be left with how quickly the other ones are growing. You could be left with the English system being way behind in terms of big T20 competitions, and that's just going to look very weird.
And the Big Bash serves as a cautionary tale, which was in a lot of ways the inspiration for the 100 having these regional teams in the first place. And we've seen by kind of clinging onto the rights themselves and not opening up to outside investment, that now they can't compete financially. And we're seeing the 100 is the same, that the numbers just don't stack up, that there's not the prestige in playing in the tournament because it's so new. The format is a bit weird for a lot of players, and it's just not the draw that they thought it would be, even though it was, given the time of year it was played, given the money involved, it looked like this was probably always going to be the case, that the best players didn't turn up.
Yeah, so the end game for the ECB, whether they say it publicly or not, and they are actually hinting at this anyway, they're saying they have to tread carefully in this space, which is a quote from, I think, Richard Thompson, new ECB chair. But the end game has to be private investment. The end game has to be luring big money in London into it and luring overseas money in the form probably of IPL ownership, part ownership of these teams, of these brands. And as Joe says, right, Australia kept it in-house and now they can't keep their players. If English cricket keeps whatever the 100 is in 2, 4, 5 years' time, whatever it actually looks like on the pitch, the final result has to be that the ECB loosen the reins on it and allow for private investment, because the biggest cricketing problem for this whole thing, forget the politics for a second, the biggest cricketing problem is that they are not able to persuade Stokes, Bairstow, Babar Azam, David Warner to say, right, you know, we're in the current market of players being paid spectacularly. They're just looking at that and thinking, well, I don't need that in my life.
They look at that as their gap. That's the time to have a rest.
That's their rest period. That's their go and do a few sponsor junket period. Now, the 100 or the 120 or whether it's this humiliating climb down and rebrand in a year or three's time, or whether they do back the 100 with private investment, they have to get to a point where they can pay the players enough money to persuade them to play. And just on that, sorry, Joe, in that story, the Telegraph story, so a London buyout firm called Bridgepoint Group offered 400 million for a 75% stake last November, according to the Telegraph piece. For a 75% stake in the 100, they offered 400 million. Now, if you imagine those kinds of numbers with IPL ownership as well, and what that could potentially mean for the money coming into the game, that, in my simplistic brain, helps the 18 counties. It doesn't hinder them.
Well, but is the issue there, though, not that, like, at the moment you have a competition run by the ECB, who's also have responsibility to ensure the county game, you know, thrives or at least exists. And if you have the 100, so this would be the 100 having a majority ownership by someone who basically doesn't really, apart from needing the players to come through, doesn't really care if the counties exist or not, right? So you're going to have, if you have private investment, the danger is that you have someone who owns this big cash cow who doesn't really care about, you know, 4-day cricket being played at Grace Road or whatever, and that they then sort of start to eat more and more and more, and they can do that in a more kind of open way, and they don't really have to appease the same stakeholders that the ECB would, right? That there might be a short-term benefit to counties in that they get the money that allows them to stay afloat, but the long-term gain is they basically just like sold off a big part of the English season to someone who, you know, is going to be trying to get more and more of that season for themselves. Like I see how that is something, like if counties might take you could see it as a myopic view, that they would think that if we just go back to what is effectively a rebranded T20 Blast, and it is, you know, mediocre in Colin Graves or whoever's words, but that means that it's our thing and we have control of it, and that we can, you know, get something that doesn't, you know, it's not competing on a global scale, but on a local scale that is maybe helping us to at least exist, that might be something that they would hope for, even though it's not the thing that's actually going to be the massive flow of money into the English game that private investment would bring.
Yeah, look, I hear you, and, you know, I'm as big a socialist as you, Ben, off the record, but the English game has to face facts, right? It's got to keep up pace with its global rivals and the pace of change. It's horrifying, but this is what the game is faced with.
And I think the biggest thing for me is, I know we've all alluded to it, but just how much less the 100 pays top players in the top leagues. So in the women's competition, it's genuinely a factor of 10 for the top players, if not more than that, compared to what they earn in the Women's Premier League. And then in the men's competition, you've got players like Tristan Stubbs in the SA20 on like 400 grand, like 4 times more than the top player in the men's 100. It's just completely different levels.
And I think this comes back to an early fallacy of the 100, where there was almost this idea circulating that it didn't really matter who was playing in the tournament because it was appealing to this new audience. So it didn't matter if you didn't have Bairstow or Butler or Stokes or even the best foreign players, because you were turning up to the grounds to learn the game and we were encouraging a new audience. Well, you'd say the 100 has probably ticked that box to a large extent, but it was really naive to think the rest of it didn't matter. If it is going to be anything on the world stage, of course you need the best players. Of course you do. And that never stacked up at the time, and it looks even more stupid now. And it is frustrating that these things were kind of put out there that didn't really make sense. But we were told that we didn't really understand and that this had to happen. And then just a couple of years down the line, it's like, oh, no, that didn't quite work out as we anticipated. Well, a lot of people did anticipate this wasn't going to work in the way that they wanted it to.
Ben, how comfortable do you feel with just the focus on the men's competition and kind of being like, okay, we can still have 8 women's teams, but we'll attach them to potentially, with promotion and relegation, it's not going to be clear how that works. Double headers have worked so well in the competition so far. Last year, it didn't really feel like the 100 really started until the women's competition began. Like, how comfortable you feel with like this being the focus of the conversation?
Well, I think the main thing is that a lot of the talk about detaching it and saying that, the women's 100 has been great, so we can keep that, so that can be kept, kind of misses the point and can almost come across in almost an insulting way, I think. Like if you're basically saying like men's 100, no, the 100, we don't want that for men's, but the women can kind of keep it, is sometimes the tone, I think. And yeah, that has been a big success fit from both points of view. I don't think that the ECB could have maybe got the men's 100 off the ground without the sort of the good PR, I guess, that the women's 100 brought in terms of them being able to sell it as a, sport on a level footing, even if that wasn't the case for the pay. And equally, the women's 100 has obviously benefited hugely from double headers, even though those were kind of an accident of COVID essentially to begin with. So I kind of think the two have to remain linked. And yeah, that is a big argument against the sort of the 18 team 100 model, I suppose, especially because in women's, obviously you have women's regional cricket, but even going back before with women's county cricket, you had some of the bigger women's counties like Berkshire obviously don't have a top level, a major men's county, and equally you would have some of the major men's counties who didn't really have a women's county team to the same level. So that would be a problem as well if you were going to try to have teams in all of the 18 county cities or county venues at the moment. That would be an issue because you'd have different infrastructure there, I suppose.
In all of, I totally agree with that. In all of this as well, there's one demographic that's hardly ever spoken about, which is the punters, right? The people who have gone to watch these games with an open mind. We did a big thing in the magazine, which I'm glad that we did, because we tried to get away from these kinds of conversations and just get to the heart of the viewing experience for people. And while it painted, as you'd expect, a kind of a mottled landscape, overwhelmingly the feeling was, this is a thing that I can get with. This is a thing that I can get my teeth into. This is a thing that I can bring my friends to, that I can bring my daughter, my son to, my mum, my dad, etc. The crowds are notably different in demographic, and the numbers are good, right? The viewing figures are pretty good for people coming into the grounds. And obviously for the women's game, it's been transformative. So this latest hand-wringing, this latest suggestion that we're just going to just break the whole thing up again and just start from scratch, while eating a lot of humble pie and being pretty much embarrassed, and you can imagine the reaction to it if it is going to be scrapped and started again. There are a lot of people who have been thinking, well, hold on, I'm just starting to get involved in this thing. I'm starting to actually develop a kinship.
But with your London Spirit merch.
That's it.
I'm sort of being slightly tongue-in-cheek, but genuinely, if you try and get attachment to these teams from supporters, and then you get that attachment to a degree, and then you say, oh, none of it really mattered in the first place.
Yeah.
It's a really, really bad look.
Yeah.
And also, just from an economic point of view as well, I mean, in the women's competition, the ECB have, okay, it's not quite on the level of the IPL, although it could be the Women's Premier League. It's not, but it could be if they upped the salaries a bit. They would have, a genuine world-leading competition in a growth market, right? And that is a valuable thing. And even if the TV rights aren't going to compete right now with what they can sell for the men's 100, we see how, women's sport is exploding kind of across the world. And if they can kind of ride that wave, that might be a long-term thing. If you think actually, like, okay, there are some problems with half of this, the other half is really, really good, and we think that this could be the thing in a few years' time.
Well, let's hear from Butch and what he thinks and all that, as well as the news that IPL franchises are tapping up English players for year-long IPL contracts. Mark, do you think if English cricket pursues a T20 or 100-ball tournament that's not of major international interest or doesn't allow the 100 to become a tournament that rivals the IPL, PSL, etc., there's a danger that English cricket is a bit left behind in not having a major internationally followed short-form tournament that generates a lot of money?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in that. The first thing being that in setting up a tournament that didn't follow any of the sort of currently played, widely enjoyed leagues and formats, you were always in danger of having something that was kind of, parts of it were a good idea and other parts of it no one was very interested in. Now, I think that's exactly where the 100 is, and I think it was always going to be like that. The reason behind the reasons behind wanting to have a different format were based around the length of time it takes to play a T20 game, being able to fit in with scheduling on free-to-air television, and perhaps having something that was so completely different that it would attract private money in a way that say maybe a T20 competition might not have done. I think that was sort of spurious thinking in the first place, because no one seems to have any problem throwing money at T20 comps. So it's not surprising. Well, I mean, the argument that we kind of need to throw the whole thing out, based around the fact that people don't play the 100 or no one else plays the 100 around the world, is the most disingenuous argument I think I've ever heard. I mean, could have told you that before you did it, But it's very interesting, the counties and lots of people have been very unhappy about the 100. Funnily enough, lots of people have become reasonably happy with it. They've formed sort of allegiances with teams that had nothing to do with who their mum and dad or granddad used to support, and they're kind of, getting on board with the idea of the new teams. My least favourite part of the whole escapade was the format itself. And if that's now being given as a reason to throw the whole lot out, the whole idea of condensing the talent and having a window to play these games in where they can all be televised, whether it be on Sky or whether it be on the BBC, I think they're kind of barking up the wrong tree again. People might have thought that it was a bad move in the first place, but I think then to throw the whole thing out and go back to something akin to the Dark Ages, where you have all 18 counties playing T20 in divisional cricket, which throws up all of the same problems that the Blast competition always had, which was that you had all the matches going on at the same time. The TV had to pick one, and if it wasn't the right one, you missed out on the opportunity to grow the game, to have more people enjoy and have water cooler moments about the game of cricket. So look, it's all sounds very messy at the moment, is all I can say. Nothing is certain. No one has sort of come out and said, right, this is absolute, and this is what we're going to do, and this is how it's going to happen. Obviously, the people who have just signed a rights deal up until 2028, they're not going to be wildly happy about the idea of the whole thing being ditched, given that they've just paid an extraordinary amount of money for it.
Yeah, I mean, you said it was messy. What do you think the ECB see the point of the 100 being? Because it was introduced as something to grow the game, but as we talked about earlier, the other competitions in the world, South Africa are bidding off playing bilateral cricket so that they can have their own tournament that generates money, like huge, vast sums of money. So that's not really how the ECB currently view it.
Well, no, I mean, the whole thing was sold around the idea of growing the game to a new audience and creating revenue for the sport, and sort of future-proofing the sport in terms of, the funds that would be brought in and drawn in by it. Those were the two reasons that everyone was given for the whole upheaval in the first place. So either that was wrong, or those things don't matter anymore. I don't know. This is why it's confusing. Look, there are lots and lots of things that can be improved in the format. There are lots of things that aren't quite right yet, but might well get there at some point. None of it's perfect, and what it does to the schedule is it's not good. Having to squeeze the Ashes in before August is just extraordinary, really, when you think about it. However, that doesn't mean that the whole exercise then needs to be torn up, and you kind of go back to some form of doing T20 cricket that we kind of did for 18, 19 years and didn't really make a great success of the first time out.
As you say, quite messy. Not totally unrelated, it was reported in the Times this week that some IPL franchises are talking to a select few English players about the possibility of handing them year-long contracts that would tie them to their IPL sides in other competitions for sums of money far in excess of what even central contracts give English players. What were your initial reactions to that?
Well, I mean, it's slightly horrifying, I suppose, but it's a natural progression. You and I, we've spoken about this at length quite recently. And it's kind of just the next step, isn't it? You watched, the IPL sort of pluck talented players out of South Africa mainly, isn't it? People like Brevis and co, and kind of take them before international cricket has even got hold of them, and kind of offer them big deals and sort of offer to give them a career as a Mumbai Indians player or whatever it might be. And so it is only it's only to be expected that they'd come after some of English cricket's prized assets as well. The sport's cannibalising itself. Michael Holding called it out long before even the IPL started. I mean, his sort of displeasure in, maybe around the time the IPL started, his displeasure in sort of having private money moving away from sort of international cricket, moving away from boards and all those types of things, all seem to be coming very much into fruition. That it's become a beast that can't be controlled by anybody, and money wins, doesn't it? That's the end of it. That's it at the end of the day. And I really don't know if for example, I don't know, say Josh Butler, pluck a name out of the air, gets offered. It's a little bit like live golf, isn't it? You kind of like you weigh up the sort of what you have in your hand at the moment, which is your England Central contract and your the guarantee of earnings up to a certain point. And somebody comes in and just blows all of that out of the water, and kind of suggests to you that you wouldn't be spending quite as much time away from home. You kind of future-proof yourself against perhaps injury or whatever else it might be. The offer becomes quite enticing, doesn't it? Particularly for players, I suppose, who have sort of gone beyond their 30th birthday and are kind of on the hill on the way down to retirement. But of course, there are also some guys who perhaps haven't quite cracked it in international cricket yet, or haven't really found the flavour of that. Who are very attractive propositions in T20 franchise cricket, and they might jump at it before they've had a real go at the international game, and that's the position we're in. And it's frankly, it's pretty frightening, I think, because the sport is not just T20 cricket, is it? I mean, that's kind of the bottom line.
Yeah.
And there are young fans or whatever. There are people who have come to the game knowing T20 cricket is the only thing, or the thing that got them into it in the first place, and that's absolutely fine. But we're generations away from losing all the people that love Test match cricket, that love the other formats of the sport. But something like this might well accelerate it.
I definitely
beyond recognition.
I definitely see all of that. I just do think though that international cricket, the governing bodies didn't do enough when they had complete control to look after the game. I mean, I was watching the IPL the other day. You had a Zimbabwean in Sikandar Raza finishing off a game, and you've got Josh Little playing for Ireland, who plays for the best team in the IPL at the moment. Those franchise competitions give players like that opportunities that international cricket for a very, very long time didn't really care about. They didn't really do anything for those players, never gave them the opportunity, limited the number of places at World Cups.
Yeah.
major boards didn't really bother playing smaller teams, and kind of this is part of the, that's partly responsible for where we've ended up.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, it's not all bad when it comes to franchise cricket, because it does do certain good things for exactly the type of player that you mentioned. The issue is if they become so big that there's no checks and balances put on them, or not even in a way whereby the boards have the power to do so, or even lose the will to do so, because things have gone so far down the road and there is nothing that they can do to stand in their way. Eventually, those cricketers that have come from places, they have to come from somewhere in the first place. The IPL is not making these guys. It didn't make Josh Little. Those guys have to come from somewhere, and those boards have to have resources in order to pay for coaching, pay for facilities, do all of the things that cricket boards do around the world, whether they're the big and the magnificent, or the lowly and just starting off. All of those things have to pay into what these players end up becoming. And if they don't have anywhere to start, then you lose the production line, unless, of course, what IPL franchises and their owners and their money are saying is that we will become the academies for budding cricketers, and we will take over the responsibility of ECB or BCCI or whatever it might be. But I don't see any sign that is what they're planning. What they're planning to do is cherry pick players who have already been developed by somebody else, offer them money that is beyond their wildest dreams, and ride off into the sunset with them.
Well, coming back to what's happening in the here and now, we've got a good old-fashioned 5-match ODI bilateral series, which I'm not quite sure why it's happening, to be honest, because they just played each other in Pakistan a few months ago. But anyway, Pakistan 3-0 up against New Zealand. Pakistan are pretty much full strength. New Zealand are missing quite a few star names. How do you rate Pakistan's World Cup chances?
I think they're as good as they ever were. I mean, they're a dynamite team. There's a bit of a hole in the middle, where they struggle to identify and pick, I think, the right players for the roles of 5, 6, 7 finishers, all rounders, and whatever. But the top order batting is fantastic. They've got Thakur, Babar, and Imam are all in the top 10 in the ODI world rankings. Bowling is dynamite, no matter which combination of quicks they play. Shadab is a terrific leg spinning all rounder, and on their night they can beat anybody, which is why they make finals. They can also be terrible, but that's just the beauty of it. So I think their chances are pretty good. Look, the series is going on at the moment. It could be really significant for Pakistan. It might be the last time they play before the World Cup. There's the series mooted to play against Afghanistan, which may or may not go ahead. Of course, the Asia Cup, which is supposed to be in Pakistan, that's really on the skids. So I don't know if that's going to go ahead. And then that's it. So the next 2 ODIs against New Zealand may well be the last time that Pakistan play official one-day international cricket before the World Cup, which is extraordinary. And also, if they win them, which you wouldn't put past them, given that New Zealand is sort of shorn of 9 first-choice players, 8 or 9 first-choice players, they then go top of the ODI rankings as well, which will be a bloody nose for a close neighbour, mentioning no names. But it's just it's extraordinary, really, that given everything that Pakistan cricket contends with over the time, the one thing that is not in question is just the amount of talent that there is in this country, and with a bit of sort of better management, a bit more sort of accountable decision making, and all those other types of things, they could be very, very tough to beat.
I was just about to say, just to finish, I've watched a lot of Pakistan this winter. Obviously, they played England a lot. I've watched quite a lot of their series against New Zealand. They're obviously in the World Cup. I don't have much hair, but I've been tearing my hair out at their selections. They have so much talent. And then I kind of look at it and how is Shan Masood batting 4-5 games potentially out of a World Cup? Aga Salman's done well, but I don't really know what his job is. Mohammad Nawaz is keeping Imad Wasim out of the team. Imad Wasim averages 40 with the bat in ODI cricket. Mohammad Nawaz has played like 80 times for Pakistan and got 150, maybe 2. I don't feel like they manage the talent that they have that well. And same with the Test series against England.
No, you're right. Given some clear-sighted selection and like I say, accountable sort of management, or at least I always get the feeling, and it is a feeling. It's not gospel that people are not allowed to be 100% responsible for their decision making. So they kind of defer it and don't. Nobody's willing to stick their neck out because they feel as though no one will back them up if it goes wrong. And I think that's a major problem in terms of management and selection for Pakistan cricket. Because you're quite right. If if they put the round pegs in the round holes, they would be an awesome team. Guys on the bench at the moment, they're not. Well, they're not even on the bench. People are not even being selected. Imad was being a prime example of that. Iftikhar is in the squad, doesn't get a game. So yeah, it's. But that's the beauty of it, I suppose. That's why they're such good fun to watch and follow.
Yeah, I mean, I'm firmly of the view that there are quite a few international tournaments that are basically only entertaining because of Pakistan, like because of how unpredictable they are. They can lose against anyone. They can put a streak together to get to the semi-finals. Anyway, yeah, I'm sure they'll be entertaining come October. Anyway, cheers for your time, Butch. Catch you next week.
No problem.
A message from the Wisden shop before we continue. Are you a cricket fan looking to take your look to the next level this season? Then check out our new cricket essentials at the Wisden shop, perfect for both playing and watching the game. Our stylish Panama hats will keep you cool and shaded during those sunny days in the sands, while our cozy wool cricket sweaters will keep you warm and comfortable on the pitch. Don't settle for ordinary cricket gear. Upgrade to our premium essentials and elevate your cricket experience. Order now and get 20% off all items at wisden.com/shop using the code podcast20. The County Championship. We had a rain-affected round that only featured 10 teams, but it was an important one, nevertheless. In Division 1, Surrey won in effectively 2 days against Warwickshire. Kemar Roach and Dan Worrell were once again outstanding, taking 15 wickets between them. Warwickshire were 23 for 3 and 39 for 6 against the new ball in the 2 innings. But with the bat, Jamie Smith played an innings his coach Gareth Batty described as the best that he's seen from the Surrey youngster. He hit 88 in a very low-scoring game and kind of showed the different gears he's got. Batted normally, in inverted commas, with the established batters, but then accelerated with a tail.
There aren't many sure bets in English cricket, but that kid plays Test cricket is as close as one as you're going to get, I think.
I mean, I guess that he can play in those different modes as well. Is there are lots of players who kind of have similar records on paper, but he's very exciting. Surrey go to Chelmsford this week, and if they win there, I would say, Joe, they go from not just favourites but to almost probable winners. I know that's very early in the season, but
it's early to say that, but I can see why you think that. I mean, that victory over Warwickshire would have looked pretty ominous to the rivals. I mean, that's the Warwickshire side. Obviously, they almost went down last year, but they've done a lot of rebuilding, and particularly in terms of their bowling attack, which again highlights the quality of Smith's innings to play that against the bowling attack of Wokes, Hassan Ali, Rushworth, Cannon Dalby, like Ed Barnard, a five-prong pace attack. And Warwickshire have been going well this season, so that was a kind of a massive early blow. And even they're doing this without a lot of their best players who are out injured. Jax is coming back now. Obviously, they'll lose a few for the Ashes, but then they're going to get a few to come back in. That they're looking very, very hard to dislodge already.
So they're top of the table now on 52 points, 7 points clear of Hampshire. I guess part of why I think that they might even be probables quite soon is just seeing how their other likely rivals have started. So Hampshire obviously doing okay, but Warwickshire now are 15 points behind, not 22 points behind. Lancashire played
haven't
three,
won a game,
haven't won a game.
Draws. Yeah.
And we call them as potential winners at the start of the season. At Lords, Middlesex beat Kent. So after their horror start of the season, Middlesex now have 2 wins from 4. Last season, Northampton and Warwickshire both stayed up with 2 wins all season. So a very, very important 10 or so days there. We had a question in from Luke who asks, Ryan Higgins, would it work at international level? Arguably the best county cricketer in recent years. So Higgins has passed 50 in every game for Middlesex this summer and has basically taken a cheap twofer in every innings he's bowled in. Joe, did you say you interviewed him?
No, I didn't interview him. Just did a little piece on him for the magazine. He's some cricketer. I mean, he's averaging 54, 55 with the bat this year, 20 with the ball, and that's not out of the ordinary. He does that kind of most years, it seems. I mean, he's back at Middlesex, having had 5 seasons at Gloucester. Middlesex obviously famously collapsed after winning the title in 2016, and letting Higgins go was one of the worst things they did in that period. I think when I spoke to Tim Murtagh last year, he talked about kind of them being a bit complacent after winning that title and a few mistakes being made, and Higgins was a big one. They didn't want him to leave, but they also didn't do enough to make him stay because they didn't play him in the year that they went down very often at all. And now he's back. He's only kind of highlighting what they've been missing. In terms of international cricket, I mean, he has played a little bit for the Lions, so he's not completely off the radar. He does feel the kind of natural successor to Darren Stevens, that in 12 years' time, as he hits 40 and takes his 1,000th first-class wicket, people will be saying, could he have done a job for England? And international cricket is such a broad term, isn't it? If it was a home series against anyone but the absolute best in the world, I think he'd do really well for England. But I wouldn't fancy him on a tour to Australia or India or South Africa. And the quality of international cricket varies hugely. There are lots of test sides out there. He gets good people out in county cricket, so there's no reason to think he couldn't do the same if he was playing test cricket. I mean, you'd say in terms of the pace he bowls, he's probably a little bit off Sam Curran, but not hugely, who's had some success in these conditions. And similarly, he's a good counter-attacker from number 7. So at a different time, I think he'd have done a decent job. In terms of what England currently have at their disposal, I'd say he's some way off.
Yeah, I guess England, I'm not saying Higgins would be the guy, but they do have a reticence to both, but essentially to picking people who could very much do a job just in England in a way that other countries don't. Like even say India, they will happily pick a guy, a bit like Akshay Patel, okay, he's now in the World Championship squad, but when they picked him to begin with, even when he was averaging 10 in that series against England, they were absolutely fine to be picking a guy who was going to do well on conditions at home and not be much use abroad. And the same in Australia, they'll prepare wickets like you don't really get anywhere else in the world. And you got a guy like David Warner, who overall has an exceptional test record, and yet that is based on like so much in his work in one country. But England wouldn't pick whoever happens to be the best county bowler at the time, say like Tom Bailey at certain times, or even like someone like Sam Cook, if they think that they're not going to have that much of a chance abroad, which is just a difference in philosophy, I guess.
And there's also, I think, we should be careful about pigeonholing people as a county cricketer. I mean, Ollie Robinson, for instance, only a few years ago, he had an unbelievable record, but the view really was that, he didn't bowl much over 80 miles an hour. He was taking some Division 2 wickets, so therefore he wasn't really a test bowler. Then you see him in test cricket, and he's got all the skills to be a fantastic bowler in whatever conditions. Now, Ollie Robinson is not the same cricketer as Ryan Higgins. Clearly, he has different qualities, but it just goes to show I don't think a bowler should have to hit 85 miles an hour and then you start thinking of them as a test prospect. You can do it in loads of different ways, and Robinson's a really good example of that.
In Division 2, Durham go top after a comprehensive win over Derbyshire. Their team included new loanee Matt Parkinson, who's joined as injury cover for Matt Kuhneman. I would recommend looking out for Ollie Robinson's highlights, the other Ollie Robinson, who joined.
My player to watch for the season.
Yeah, going well at the moment.
Like the 6 we picked each.
He scored 100, as did Bryden Cast, but Robinson's 100 was really, really good. Obviously, there were reasons why he left Kent. Wasn't getting as much game time, wasn't keeping wicket as much as he'd like to, but that's a serious signing for Durham, who are going very, very well at the moment at the top of Division 2. Behind them, in number 2, in second place in Division 2, Leicestershire, after their draw against Glamorgan. Rahan Ahmed fell just short of a century there. Sussex were robbed by the rain after being bailed out by the rain last week. They're all over Gloucestershire. Pajara scored another 100. But excitingly, next week they'll have Steve Smith with them. Smith was unveiled yesterday, I think, at Hove. Apparently, Ollie Robinson got him out in the nets, leaving a straight one, which will be a funny little subplot to follow. You got
you were asking the other day, weren't you? All-time great county cricket overseas duos.
Yeah.
Were you going to do a bit on this, Yas?
No, but we can do now.
All right.
Pajara and Smith are going to be together.
They're right up there. I think in the 21st century they would probably be top. If you're going back, you've got who was it that we had? We had Barry Richards and Gordon Greenidge.
Yeah,
that's a good one. Obviously, Viv and Joel Garner at Somerset is a
you had Greenidge and Marshall after Richards moved on.
That's
Greenidge
good.
and Marshall at Hampshire as well. That's pretty strong. I think you'd have had
there was one with Clive Rice and
Richard
someone else
Hadley
really good.
at
Yeah,
Notts.
that's useful.
Yeah, very good shout. Very good shout.
But I think that'd be quite a funny little subplot to follow, because you've got the two biggest cricket nerds from either side spending a lot of quality time together before the series start.
Just quickly on Div 2 shaping up nicely. It's almost kind of reversed how it was last year. Not exactly, but with Leicestershire, Sussex, Durham all going quite well. Derbyshire right at the bottom, and Gloucestershire haven't got a win yet, having been relegated. Basically, it's my predictions upside down.
This is the thing, though. So Glamorgan, Gloucestershire, Yorkshire, three very good sides
Yorkshire,
on
of course,
paper.
down the bottom.
None of them have won a game yet. Durham are the only side that won 2 games. They played a game more than most of the sides. But I mean, Gloucestershire came down from Division 1 last year. One of their games was abandoned against Yorkshire. But that's 27 points from 4 games. That's nearly a... What's that? That's four out of 14 games gone. That's a significant chunk of the season gone to only have 27 points.
And weather's obviously played a part in that as well. But Durham have been rewarded, and Phil did a little bit on this in the magazine, for playing really aggressive attacking cricket and trying to force results. And you wrote about Carse in the magazine as well, who's another one who's sticking his hand up as a fast bowler making some runs who we'll be looking at.
Yeah, I think I'd written it before he made that 100, but
he'd got a career best prior to that, hasn't he? He got an 80 odd, and then he got the 100.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's only really in brackets in the story of the summer, realistically. But moving forward, if he can stay fit, and England need a number 8, then Robinson hasn't really cracked it, not made a run really at number 8. That could really help his cause, Bryden Carse, if he can get a few more as well. And
it'd be another one that Stokes knows plenty about and likes a lot.
And also, just on, I know before the season started, Butch did a little bit on how he hates bonus points. But part of Durham doing so well is actually bonus points. So they've got 17 batting bonus points from 4 games, and it's harder to get those than previously. Gloucestershire, for example, haven't got a single point from a batting bonus point. So Durham's kind of aggressive style is paying off big time.
I didn't hear that about Butch. I didn't catch that bit.
He basically hates bonus points in county cricket. He basically most teams get about the same bowling points, and why should you get more points for winning in a slightly different way?
Right.
On the cast thing, I don't think it's completely out of the question that we see him in an England shirt this summer, given...
In a test shirt?
Yeah, given the pitches that Stokes wants, and given, what we discussed about Jofra Archer. I mean, hopefully Archer is fit, but at the moment you say that's a less than 50% chance, I guess, if you're having to put a number on it.
And
then
quite a bit less than,
and then you've got what? So you've got Ollie Stone, Mark Wood, and Bryden Carse. If they want to have one of those 3, I guess you've got Sakeem Mahmood in there as well, but Carse could easily move himself up in that queue with a few more runs and wickets.
Yeah, fair.
Some rankings news. So India are now top of the ICC Test team rankings. England are only 2 points off Australia in second place, and England could go top if Australia win the World Test Championship final, and then England win the Ashes either 4-1, 4-0, 3-0, or 5-0.
I actually wanted to bring this up earlier because the reason why Australia were top until now essentially was because of their good record from sort of 2020 until, their good record the whole way through, but their good record in 2020 until the end of 2021 was when they didn't play an away test match. And in the context of them getting quite wound up by Stuart Broad saying that series was void, well, Australia chose not to tour at all for that whole time. So maybe there's a few different things going on there. I don't know.
Bit of World Test Championship final news. It looks like KL Rahul is at least an injury out. I don't think he's been ruled out of the World Test Championship final yet, but he's been ruled out of the rest of the IPL. And moving on to the IPL, my moment of the week is the 100 by Yashasvi Jaiswal. He scored 124 off 62 when no one in his team passed 20. I've always been interested in him because he was the player of the tournament at the Under-19 World Cup that I was at a few years ago. But that's no guarantee of success, obviously. His first-class record is absurd. He averages 80 with 900s from 15 games. including some appearances for India A. He's still only 21, and he is one of the leading run scorers in the IPL this time. At the start of the season, he was doing pretty well, but was criticised for slowing down against spin in the middle overs. He's kind of gotten over that. I guess one of the questions for young players is how are they against pace? He hooked Jofra Archer out of the stadium during this innings. He's extremely confident. During that Under-19 World Cup, he scored 100 against Pakistan, which is obviously good for increasing your popularity as a young Indian player. But it was the way he celebrated the 100 I thought was quite telling. It was like he definitely knew the significance of the moment and really, really enjoyed it. So I don't think he's the big occasion scares him at all. And yeah, he's already played for India A. I think he'll be playing all formats for India very, very soon. Maybe as soon as the start of the next World Test Championship cycle after the 50 over World Cup. But I think he's like properly on that Shubman Gill trajectory.
My boy Devon Conway creeping up the run charts. If he gets there, I'm rich beyond my wildest dreams.
Just one thing I wanted to moan about is just how slow the IPL games are. So that Rajasthan-Mumbai game on Sunday took 4.5 hours.
That's mad.
And I think it is so slow, you almost forget that you're watching a good game. And partly because they don't have breaks during the power play. The power plays are really good to watch. And then you have, at least 2 significant breaks for strategic timeouts. Then I think there's another advert break in the middle. And then with 4 unsuccessful reviews each, and you can now review wides and no balls. There are just so many breaks in play in the last 14 overs that just takes away the momentum, and I think it does detract from how good the games are.
Maybe they should try shortening it, shave off like 20 balls per innings or something.
There's one review I think yesterday that was just so far outside. The batter was hit so far outside off stump, but they couldn't actually make that decision until Hawkeye had generated. So you had to just wait there for something that just looked ridiculous, which I think they actually are. We talked about 100 earlier. They're very good in the 100 at actually just getting through nonsense reviews. Ben, your moment of the week is from the IPL.
Yeah, well, it was the aftermath of the Royal Challenge Bangalore.
Oh, is this the Kohli?
The Kohli.
Stuff? I'm glad you picked this because I didn't really understand the story. So
yeah, well,
I don't know anything about this.
Okay, well, I'll try and say. So the main bit that was focused on was right after the game. So RCB had won a low scoring thriller, I guess, with spin dominating, and in the post match handshake. So to begin with, as they're going along, Kohli shakes hands with Naveen Ul-Haq, Afghanistan quick, and they then sort of keep a bit like Conte and Tuchel in the Spurs-Chelsea game.
I was thinking Jurgen Klopp, but anyway.
Well, in particular, the handshake that kind of keeps going longer than it should, and there's a few words exchanged. They then get pulled apart. It seems like it's all quieting down. Kohli then walks off with Carl Mayers, who's a LSG West Indies opening batter, and they are just having quite a nice chat, it seems like, at which point Gautam Gambhir comes over and sort of pulls Carl Mayers away, sort of saying, like, you don't speak to him, he's the enemy, I think is the subtext there. And then they're kind of having a shouting match, sort of like across the pitch, and then everyone basically is involved, sort of pulling each other away, which is the kind of, it's just, the scenes you don't like to see, which you do like to see.
Of course.
This was going on kind of all through the game, and there was also
So Gambhir was the instigator.
Well, yeah, it's definitely I think that's probably fair to say, especially when you go through the history of Gambhir Kohli. I didn't realise this thing had such a big history, but way back in like 2013, they were kind of sparring on the field in an IPL game,
right? And
Gambhir kind of never lets an opportunity go to fire a barb at Kohli in the press when he's on commentary or whatever it may be at his captaincy or anything else.
Right.
There was even, what was it? So there was when his team at the time, I can't remember who it was, but they bowled out RCB for 49, which is still the lowest IPL total, and then he had a cake the next day which had play bowled on it, but bold spelt BOWLED, which is a play on RCB's slogan.
Right.
So there's a bit of like a spike at them even in that moment. So, and Gambhir, what is he even doing there? This man is an elected MP, he's a member of the Indian Parliament, but then he's also LSG's global mentor, which I think involves just being there in full kit for some reason and just winding up
maybe
Virat Kohli.
Taking inspiration from Mickey Arthur's dual role with Pakistan and Derbyshire.
So yeah, that was fun. I mean, obviously you do see Kohli wound up quite a lot, but I just didn't realise it was such a long running feud, which is
And do we have any idea what led to the thing starting in the first place?
So there was a bit of needle in the previous game they played this season, and I think Kohli used that to get himself fired up, I guess, because there was quite a lot of stuff he was doing that was almost referencing to stuff in that game. So I think in that first game,
there was a lot of shushing to the crowd in that game that Kohli was doing in this game, referencing that.
And there was even like someone made a half century in that first game and like blew a kiss to the crowd, and then Kohli was blowing his kisses to the crowd in this game. So there was one of the things between Kohli and Naveen al-Haq was, I think Naveen was upset at seeing Kohli, thinking Kohli had sort of run across the pitch to maybe rough it up. And then Kohli was sort of like showing the bottom of his shoe, saying like, "There's no dirt on my shoe," kind of thing. There was lots of little stuff that blew up at the end, I guess.
There's quite often you get mini spats between players that get overblown. This one genuinely wasn't. Like, they were properly going at each other and need to be separated.
Marvellous stuff.
Anyway, moving on. In the Rachael Heyhoe Flint Trophy, Alice Capsey took a sixfer this week. The star performer so far has been Paige Schofield, who's got 2 tons in 3 games, both from the middle order. I think 100 from number 6 was the first time someone's hit 100 from number 6 in the Rachael Heyhoe Flint Trophy. There was 100 for Ireland's Orla Prendergast for Western Storm. She's only 20 years old. She's had a really good year. But a player to keep an eye on this summer, but also for many summers to come, is Isa Guha, who's only just turned 17. She's a left-arm seamer, very, very tall. She made her debut for the Thunder. She took 3 for 39, albeit in defeat. But she's played something like 20, maybe even more, T20Is for the UAE already. She played at the Fair Break tournament a couple of weeks ago and did really well there, and is eligible for England. But yeah, if you watch her bowl, I think instantly you're thinking she can't be a million miles off international selection. And we saw in the last couple of years how quickly they promoted Alice Capsey, Izzy Wong, Freya Kemp, that actually 17 might not be too young if you have a good run in the domestic competitions.
Schofield as well, right? So she transferred over at the end of last year. She moved from the Vipers, which is obviously the dominant side, to make 200s in the first 3 games from number 6. She's never played for England before. She's eligible too. I think she was born in South Africa, but eligible to play for England. Never really featured, but the beauty of these tournaments, with a little bit more coverage and a little bit more profile, and obviously more players now on the payroll, is that you do get more opportunity and you do get more chance to see these players break through that would otherwise you either wouldn't know about them, or you'd feel like the door is pretty much shut on these emerging players.
And that was a recurring theme. We'll come on to the new issue of the magazine, but we did a kind of extended guide to the women's domestic season, and Katia, between me and Katia, we interviewed a player from each regional team about the kind of that player, but also the kind of state of play in general. And a recurring theme throughout that was this sense that performances in domestic cricket really matter now, and that England are actually paying attention, whereas previously, perhaps for good reason, because the quality wasn't high enough to actually show that they were ready for international cricket, they weren't getting watched or listened to, or those performances would kind of just disappear into the ether. I spoke to Sophie Luff, who's Western Storm's captain, who's been on the verge of England throughout her career. I think she's about 30 now. And she said she always felt previously that those performances didn't matter, but now they really do. And so I think we now will see names parachuted into the England side much quicker than we have done in the past, where it has been pretty much the same old faces and felt a bit like a closed shop.
David asks, what does the abandoning of the Blaze versus Thunder game due to a poor pitch say about the value of the Rachael Heyhoe Flint Trophy, supposedly the premier domestic white ball competition aside from the 100? So this game was called off at about 2:00 despite there being no rain on Monday. According to Cricket Her, the ground was used for a men's club game 2 days before, and play continued through the rain. So the outfield was in a poor, ultimately unsalvageable state by the time the women's game was supposed to start. I wasn't there, so I can't really comment, but I guess that is something that you do get in the men's game as well. You've had games already this season called off without any rain on the day itself, just because of just how much rain has fallen in April.
Yeah, that is true. I think the wider concern for the women's game will be the venues that this competition is being played at. I mean, this is obviously it's a club ground, and this is the issue, well, not the issue, but this is something that will have to be reckoned with the expansion of the calendar, with, trying to basically get more in all the time and trying to have a women's calendar that kind of, befits the standard of cricket that is being played now. That means that at some point we're going to need just like more venues, I think, or at least something creative done to ensure that we can get sort of high level grounds used for high level cricket.
Because the context here is that there's double the amount of group games in the Rachael Heyhoe Flint Trophy this year than there were last, which is a great thing, but obviously it just means more days in the calendar, more pitches to find. Some of them play at county grounds, but obviously there are going to be clashes with the men's games, and there's quite a few games at club grounds, which doesn't mean the wickets aren't good necessarily, but I guess you will just encounter a few more issues.
Talked in the intro about how there's been a bit of trash talk in the women's Ashes as well as the men's Ashes. Izzy Wong gave an interview this week to ESPN Quick Info where she said, I think it's a pretty good time to play Australia, just quietly. She did say they are undoubtedly one of the greatest sports teams ever, but she then said, but it feels like that kind of golden era they've had is, you've had Rachael Haynes retiring, Lanning stepped away, but obviously coming back in ridiculous form, and there's a lot of new faces in that group who are unbelievably talented, but haven't necessarily played the biggest part for them the last couple of years. I think it's a really good time to actually go at them and say, right, you are the best team in the world, best team in history, but you've got a couple of new faces in there, and let's see if you are as good as you were 5 years ago.
She's grifting hard there. I really like that. I love the Lanning line. She had a rest for a few weeks, but she's basically the Bradman of cricket.
but then she says at the end, I've never played them though. I've watched them on telly a lot, and they look great, which is great.
That's brilliant. Fair play.
Joe, there is a new magazine, and as mentioned at the start, Isa Guha is the guest editor. What does that mean? Does that mean that you and Phil basically get a month off?
Oh, that would be lovely. I think Phil would agree. We've done these a few times, going back to when we did All Out Cricket together as well. And the guest editor sort of means what the guest editor wants it to mean. So there are different levels of input. And in the past, we've had a couple who were. Are we naming names? Probably not. I mean, we've had a nice time at a pub, had a conversation, and then that can help us dictate the magazine. That has not been the case at all with Isa, who's been very, very much involved. We've been talking about doing this for almost a year now, and it's just been hard finding a gap in her very busy calendar. She came with loads of ideas. She's actually got feature ideas for the issue beyond this that we're going to be doing as well. So she was very hands-on. So yeah, it's a series of meetings with her having some input in what she wants to see in the magazine, the how she wants it shaped. In some cases, what she doesn't want in there. We had a couple of those as well, which is good to hear. We really enjoyed having someone care that much and really come with a clear idea of how it should look and what the magazine should say. I don't know if I should say this or not, but Phil and I basically do what we want most of the time. Been doing it long enough, so it was kind of nice, a different point of view to have someone sort of directing us to a degree.
Yeah, I started writing something, and she sort of said, "Nah, I'm not having that." I said, "Whoa, oh, okay, all right, fine, fair enough. No, I get that. Well, that is your job. That is your right as well."
Although we did famously have Mark Nicholas telling you how to edit an email.
Yeah, edit, Phil, edit.
That was All Out Cricket.
He was good, by the way, Nicholas, when he did it. He was in the really good camp. There's one or two who possibly weren't even entirely aware that they were even inhabiting the role. But...
Well, he went and got us Dhoni, didn't he, for All Out Cricket?
Yeah.
And similarly, Isa went and interviewed Joss Butler for the world exclusive front page story. An interview she did herself whilst he was out in India at the IPL. And it's a really good one. I mean, he's always low key with Joss, but he always speaks interesting about a lot of different things, about his struggles with red ball cricket for England, the direction the game is going in. I thought most interesting was his fascination with psychology, that he reads Jeffrey Archer novels. So yeah,
everyone has an Achilles heel. The front cover is a masterpiece.
It was Phil's idea. So I mean, it's really, really good. I think Phil's a particular fan of it because it was his concept, and it ended up looking very nice. Is that fair to say?
It's inspired by Peter Blake, the old pop artist, the one who did Sgt. Pepper front cover and various other good bits of work. Why are you giggling, Gardner?
It's just a nice conversation I'm enjoying listening to.
And we thought Butler's there's a stillness to Butler in the chaos of his life, of his global life, and So we came up with that idea of having a kind of a chaotic cover with lots and lots of different poppy images with Butler, this kind of still Buddha-like figure in the heart of it. And it came out beautifully.
Nice. Well, Joe spoke to Isha earlier about the magazine. Here is that conversation.
Well, thanks so much, Isha, for helping us out on this issue. Yas said earlier, does that mean that you and Phil got to put your feet up this month? It wasn't quite like that, but we appreciated the new ideas and a new direction as well. How did you find it all?
Yeah, look, thanks so much for the opportunity. And yeah, whether you got to put your feet up, I'm not so sure about that, whether it was more stressful for you having to deal with me. But look, no, it was actually amazing. It was an amazing experience to be able to kind of, you know, get deeper into how things are put together with the magazine. Obviously, having been associated with the magazine for a while, but not necessarily being that involved with the editorial content, and obviously appreciate everything you guys do. I'll be completely honest with you, I don't read everyone, and so it was amazing to actually go back through the last sort of 12 months or so, just to kind of see the content that was coming out across every magazine, and really just kind of remember the different magazines that you put together. And then kind of put my stamp on this one, in terms of the ideas and kind of where we wanted to go with different topics. Certainly, you know, that I think we're really lucky in cricket to have so many different amazing journalists globally, and who I hugely respect and admire, and who can speak really well and with creativity about the game. But I do feel like some conversations get missed, or perhaps don't have as much attention as others, and so that's, you know, what I wanted to kind of try and bring through in this magazine, and I feel like we were able to do that. So yeah, really pleased with it.
Yeah, I mean, you addressed this in your editor's letter, which kicks off the magazine, but maybe for those who haven't read it, or maybe aren't so familiar with the magazine anyway, you're obviously a very, very busy person. You do many things in the game. We kind of thought, when we were talking about people who would like to do this, we thought of you immediately, but then we thought if you can actually have the time or the motivation. But it was clear that you certainly had the motivation, if not the time. But you managed to carve out for now. What did appeal about taking on this role? What made you want to do it?
Yeah, well, Phil and I actually spoke about it last year, and I wanted to do it then, but then, as you mentioned, things got quite busy, and it was, you know, I felt like if I was going to do it, I wanted to have time to do it, and actually I have had a bit of time off, purely just to get a bit of balance, and I did want to get away from cricket, but I was really reflecting on the last couple of years in cricket and my own personal journey, but also when you're away from the game, it does allow you just that time to kind of really think about the bigger picture of it all, and my head was fully focused on Take Her Lead, and I was getting into that a lot more. So while I did want to break from cricket, I was still, you know, doing quite a lot in cricket. So maybe just a break from the broadcast of the game. But in terms of that time, yeah, I just had a lot of time at home just to really kind of concentrate on the different issues that the game has been faced with. Being able to work with Wisden on this allowed me that time to almost, I wanted to get to a point where I could crystallize everything in my head, and really kind of bring all the different narratives and thoughts together, because there are so many different viewpoints that people have and perspectives that people have in the game, and really I just wanted to get an understanding myself. So by doing this particular exercise, it has allowed me to do that.
And you weren't just directing us, you got stuck in yourself as well. You did the interview with Jos Buttler, which is our cover story. It's a really fascinating interview. He's always an interesting bloke to listen to, and I think particularly at this point in his career, where he's sort of entering like statesman-like kind of position, particularly having taken over from Owen Morgan. How was that interview, and were you pleased with what you got from it?
Yeah, it was a great interview with Joss. I mean, look, we've got so many amazing characters in our game, and he is one in that he's quietly confident and assured, and he kind of just goes about his business, but there's a real steeliness there. And I wanted to kind of bring through, lots of different things that he's been thinking about, obviously on the back of the T20 World Cup, which was such an amazing occasion. I mean, I was fortunate to be there, and I got to hang out with the guys after. So, I kind of got to see him in that kind of more relaxed mode, and obviously at the start when he'd just taken over from Owen. So I really wanted to get an idea or a sense of how that journey went for him. Because athletes are always striving for success and to put their own mark on things, and I think he's absolutely done that with this team. So it was more kind of leaning down that path as opposed to the extraordinary cricketer he is in his own right. It was amazing to get an insight into his mindset, which we do often in broadcast, but to really kind of get him thinking about what is so important for him to be the great cricketer that he is, and as just a thought leader in the game, as you mentioned, that kind of arrival as a statesman in the game, but it has been a journey to get there because of everything he's had to go through beforehand, but now I think he is such a crucial figure and voice. So just to hear the things that he's talking about in the dressing room and the impact that he has on players around him, I think he's actually a really important person as we kind of have this reckoning in cricket, and we need leaders to kind of guide us through the next phase, if you like, which I think, as I mentioned at the start of the mag, it's a real opportunity. We've got ICC imminently about to drop, and it's going to be tough reading, but on the back of that, we need some really strong people in the game to be able to kind of lead us into a more positive outlook and future. So yeah, it's kind of trying to bring those positive elements through in the magazine as well.
And there's loads in there. It's an extended issue. We've got more pages than we usually do. You were feeding us ideas, giving us contacts, and we were sending through the finished product to you to have a read through. Any other articles that jumped out that we sent through? You haven't seen, neither of us seen the finished product out. That's out on Friday, but you've seen PDFs of the articles. Anything particularly jump out that you enjoyed, or you're pleased how it came together?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few in there. I love the history of commentary piece that Phil did, and kind of going through the ages with that, because it has evolved quite substantially. I think Katia's piece was really powerful for me. I think she's an incredible writer, and I've just been so impressed with her work over the last year or so. I think absolutely it was a topic, as I mentioned before. There are some topics that haven't been covered as much, and I think it's something that we haven't necessarily seen the female perspective of things when it comes to Afghanistan as much, and I think she did a tremendous job of that. I mean, it's very difficult. It's a very difficult, complex situation, but I think it's so important to have all the different, as I mentioned, different perspectives on what is actually happening in that situation. I think she's done an incredible job with it. Lots of fun, nice pieces as well. I mean, Lottie with Mel, I thought that was a lovely piece, just getting a different side to Lottie, the Lottie that I know, coming through in that article. Enid Bakewell as well, you get an idea of her character, and that was key for me as well. The different people that you hear from in this magazine, you really are getting an insight into their personalities. Ebbs, of course, and Enid Bakewell, who is just a fun-loving character. So some amazing pieces in there.
Well, brilliant. Thanks, Ish. Same time again next year.
Sorry, I must say, Joe, the one that you did, the procreation one you did with Greg Healy, I wasn't expecting you to get Elisa as well. So that was amazing. That really is an amazing family. And Elisa, for her to feel confident enough to speak to you about things that have happened in the past that, not many people know about, I think was, I think it's really important. And I think she appreciated the opportunity to speak about it.
Oh yeah, I mean that interview's going to stay with me. That was really quite moving to hear her talking on those subjects. But anyway, Isha, you're mad busy as ever, so I'm going to let you go. But thanks again so much for all your help on this. And I'd encourage all our listeners to go and buy it and have a look.
Cheers, Joe.
Joe, what else is in the magazine?
Well, in the kind of the blurb I write each month, I describe this as our widest ranging issue yet. And I definitely think that is the case because there is just so much different stuff in there. And part of that was kind of Isha's inspiration and also just, I guess, what's going on in the game at the moment. Top of my head, Kassia's done a really, really good piece on the plight of Afghanistan's female cricketers, speaking to two cricketers who were awarded contracts by the Afghanistan Cricket Board in 2020, I think it was, and have obviously had to flee the country subsequently because of the Taliban seizure of power. It's their story. It's what they think should happen now in Afghanistan cricket. It's what they think should happen with the men's team. Really interesting read. Kathy's done a brilliant job to get the interviews done and to kind of shape it in the way that she has. That's a fantastic piece of work. So I would absolutely encourage people to read that. Other stuff in there, we've got a really nice interview of Charlotte Edwards done by Mel Farrell, which is a lot of it is about Charlotte Edwards' experience of coaching Mumbai Indians to the WPL title, dealing with a changing room that largely didn't speak English, communicating through emojis, learning a bit of Hindi herself. And yeah, that's another one I'd recommend. Phil's done a piece on... Well, it's cricket commentary. It's the best lines in cricket commentary to tell the story of cricket commentary, essentially.
Yeah, that'll do. Yeah. Going back to a fella called Howard Marshall in 1934. That was the first recorded, actually the first audio that is available, right? There was cricket commentary in the 20s. Originated in Australia, by the way. But the first audio that is still available to listen to now was from the 1934 Ashes, done by a dapper Dan called Howard Marshall. And to listen to it, it's incredible because it could be taken, all right, with the plumminess, which is obviously priced into BBC, announcers and broadcasters of the time. But the tone, the rhythms, the gentle kind of evocations, it could just be taken from there and just dropped right into TMS right now. So it's incredible how forward-thinking it was, how prescient it was. And using that first line and then taking a line from Arla in 1948, the Bradman line where he said next to nothing and just let the crowd make the noise for you. And then moving through the ages of commentary to the here and now and taking each line, there's about maybe a dozen or so, and trying to sort of stitch the story of the time around those particular lines and telling the story of commentary as well. Obviously in the context of Isha being a superstar commentator these days.
We've also got, definitely want to highlight the county files. So each month during the county season, we have a story on each and every one of the 18 first-class counties, an update on how their season's going, a couple of interviews in there as well. So lots for county fans. Mark Ramprakash is always strong in his columns.
He's on fire, isn't he? He's on fire at the minute.
Since we put him in hibernation over winter and we brought him back out for the new season, and he's hitting them well. He's talking about how you select a cricket team and how Ben Stokes and Brendan McCullum, among the many things they've done, is completely shake that up in terms of the nature of players they want. Ramps talks about an ideal cricket team in theory always has a balance of different types of players, and that's not certainly in terms of their batting what McCullum and Stokes seem to want. He posits the interesting kind of question: would a young Alistair Cook or Jonathan Trott even get in this test side? And he says he doesn't think they'd be anywhere near. They'd be asked to change the way they play, and that's quite a kind of terrifying thought given what they did as England cricketers.
You tell the story of the Healey's, the Healey family, the Healey dynasty, the Gauntlet dynasty of Australia.
Yeah, so I spoke to Greg Healey, who is Ian's brother, Alyssa's father. That shouldn't have been that difficult. and Alyssa herself, who's got, it's an amazing family history they've got there. There's been a Healey behind the wickets for Australia for a very, very long time, in either men's or women's cricket, and it's a kind of a tragedy to their family story as well. Alyssa lost her older sister when she was only, I think, 10 years old, and they kind of delve into that as well. So there's a lot to take in. It was actually kind of one of the most moving pieces I've ever done, just because talking to them both about that was quite an experience. And I spoke to Ina Bakewell, 82, force of nature, one of my favourite interviews ever. We just had a good chat for a long time. Not a lot of it was necessarily relevant to the interview I was doing, but she is a lovely, lovely human being, and just a proper character. So I spoke to her about her cricket life, including digging up potatoes and selling them on her front lawn to raise money to be able to go to the tour of Australia and New Zealand in the 60s. What a woman.
As always, you can get the magazine at wisden.com/shop. We will leave links in the description. Couple of listener contributions to finish. This is from YouTube commenter Finley on last week's show. I'm absolutely mesmerised by Phil's choice of attire. A fur leather jacket sat atop a Puma sports hoodie. Maybe I should be watching the YouTube feed more often.
Right, so you
want a response to that?
You bastards, you sent this out on the WhatsApps, but obviously because I'm an egomaniac, I showed my wife, and she said, yeah, that was the morning when you were getting dressed. And I said to you, why are you wearing that? And you said, because I'm doing a podcast.
I'm glad you've admitted that. And Phil's looking quite smart today as well. But
I'm off to the theatre.
He's off to the West End. So yeah,
and because we're doing a podcast. Ben on the other hand, still in his jumper, in his Hackney jumper.
What a nice
But
jumper.
that jawline, it matters not what you wear, sir.
Finally, Nick asks, how have your club cricket seasons started? Now, that is a great question, Nick. So our warm-up games have been cancelled so far, but we are looking short for the month of May. So if there are any cricketers in the South London area at any standard, our 1s and 2s play in Division 4 of the Surrey Championship, and our 3s is anyone can play for them and you'll have a good time. We are all looking for new players. So if you want to play for us, find me on Twitter and send me a DM. We will find you a spot on a team.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not hugely looking forward to the first game of the season.
Our two both rained off. Not even rained off, just pitch waterlogged, bad states of affairs, and availability for the first league game on Saturday is not looking good.
Well, the issue is
could be a long season.
It's the 3 bank holidays in May.
Right.
That is a problem. Too many opportunities for people to go on holiday.
And you're still vice skipper.
Still vice captain.
So you've got a role to play in selection as well. Or are you trying to avoid that?
Yeah, I'm involved in a. Yeah, I am consulted on selection. I don't have the power.
As in, do you have any players?
Yeah, I mean,
can you stick it on the podcast?
I don't think there's been many occasions over the last year where we've been actively choosing from really good 2s players who don't make the cut a week because of good availability. That's not really happened. But we managed to stay up last season, and I would take 8th place now if you gave it to me. Anyway.
Optimism overflowing as ever at the start of May. Brilliant.
Anyway, I don't know how long this will be, but I think this will be at least an hour and a half. So well done for getting to the end of this one. Cheers, Joe. Cheers, Phil. Cheers, Ben. This has been the Wisden Cricket Weekly Podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week.